And welcome to a special episode of The Great Derelict, a podcast about everything and anything to do with science fiction. And this podcast is being produced as part of the Lawless Comic Convention. I'm joined today by Andy Turnbull, who is one of the many bots which come together to form the great gestalt that is TF Nation. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
I cannot complain. It is a relatively nice day. The sun has been out. And we're here to talk about something that some people might not wonder why we're talking about it. There might be some questions. We're here to talk about Transformers.
Which shouldn't be a surprise given that I'm involved in TF Nation.
Well, there is that, and
Yeah.
I'd presume I would have read the title. But you know, we're here for Lawless, which is a convention about British comic books. And we're here talking about Japanese toys. So where have I gone wrong? Which fork down the road did I take wrong? Should I turn left back there at Metroplex?
Oh no! I think you're on the right path here, because Transformers had a very influential UK comic and a US one as well. I do realise I sound very down on the US one. It came first.
No, well, it did come first, but I suppose there's going to be a perception that Transformers existed solely to sell toys. But in a moment we're going to cut away to an interview that you had with Simon Furman, who was one of the writers of the UK version of the comic, and it had a huge impact on the lore. It was much more than just trying to sell toys. I mean, just very briefly, because people want to go and get to Simon, but if people listen to this and they're going like, why should I be listening to these people talk about toy robots? What was special about the comic, specifically the UK one?
The UK comic had the tendency to kind of look at the toys and just it was used to sell toys and they did tie in with Hasbro, as Simon will kind of talk about, but they never wrote down to the readers, and Simon professes they kind of wrote up a little bit. And in its heyday, it was going toe-to-toe with 2000 AD in its sales figures, so it was doing something right. And I know if we look at supermarket shelves now, licensed kids' comics, there doesn't seem to be a lot of love or craft involved. It is very much here's a press kit, photos, and here's a word search, there's your comic. Whereas you were getting a weekly, for the UK instalments, certainly for the early run, you were getting fully painted artwork, or painted colours on top of black and white line art.
It's a legacy which has lasted over 30 years, and I don't want to presume, but let's just say we're both the wrong side of 20 and still here talking about.
Yeah. Exactly. It also helped Marvel UK at the time, who'd been primarily just a reprint house, move into original content, and then produce things like Death's Head, and then in sort of the early 90s, the Death's Head 2 and all the various sort of Marvel UK relaunch. So it's probably responsible for Marvel UK's most prolific time in terms of producing original content.
Now this is a world that still continues to this day, doesn't it? Marvel UK sadly are no more, but the world of the Transformers comic has continued through first Dreamwave and then IDW, and you can still follow this today, can't they?
Yeah, IDW are on their second version of their continuity, but again, Simon was brought in to shepherd the very first version of that. Some of the people who grew up on his work ended up writing and steering the ship for IDW for quite a period of time. And the work is constantly being reprinted. Hachette have just recently finished going through a 100-volume graphic novel collection that had all of the Marvel stuff, as well as some of the Dreamwave that they could, because there are some legal issues, sadly, surrounding their bankruptcy, and a vast swathe of IDW's output.
Well, I think that's enough for me anyway. So I'm going to just hand you here the keys to a derelict, and I'm going to go off and make myself a cup of tea. I'm going to leave you and Simon to have your little chat about Transformers.
Today we're going to have a little look at the history of the Marvel UK Transformers comic, which ran from 1984 to just inside 1992, and we're going to be joined to discuss that with arguably the person most associated with that, comics and animation writer Simon Furman. So,
hi there.
Thanks for taking the time to join us and discuss this. Was it a fond memory or millstone around your neck?
Oh, no, definitely fond memories, not just of writing for the comic, but of being on staff at Marvel at the time. You know, it was a great period of my life, really.
So it's probably worth looking at. So Transformers launched as a comic in the UK in September of 1984. So where were you in your career at the time?
At the time, I was just about finishing up at IPC magazines. I was working on a short-lived comic called Scream with my editor there, Ian Rimmer. And either by that time or around that time, Scream folded, and I was temporarily without work. But thankfully, Ian Rimmer moved over to Marvel UK, and a few months later, sort of introduced me to Sheila Cranner, who was editing the new Transformers comic, and B, took me on as his assistant editor on Captain Britain Monthly.
So at the time, so you were working sort of in an editorial role before you were involved in the sort of creative aspect of Transformers. So in the office at the time, what was sort of the reaction to it?
I think, to be honest, it was so early on in the process of Transformers. I think maybe the first issue of the American series had come out by then or was pending. So, they just had photostats of the pages of the original 4-issue miniseries. And I think what had happened was they were launching pretty much on the back of that, not expecting it to be more than that miniseries, but pretty immediately afterwards it became clear that the Marvel US series was going to be ongoing, and that Transformers UK therefore had a longer lifespan, and because it was fortnightly instead of monthly like the US comic, they urgently needed UK originated comic strip to fill the sort of the gaps, I suppose, or not gaps, but delays in the next batch of Marvel US material.
So the first tale was written by Steve Parkhouse, so for 4 issues, Man of Iron, which you've sort of revisited later on in your career with IDW, but you then come on next with The Enemy Within. Now, did you have to pitch for that, or were they just looking for warm bodies at the time to keep this material going until the next batch of US issues arrived?
I think very much they were just looking for other writers. I don't know whether Steve had intended to do more, probably not. I think Steve was doing a lot of work on Doctor Who magazine at the time for Marvel, and was probably, again, a sort of convenient warm body writer to do the first story. And what they really wanted, I'm sure, was a pool of writers. So, I was, like I say, invited in to meet Sheila by Ian, and Sheila more or less just gave me a stack of reference material, the US miniseries in whatever form they had it, and asked me to go away and pitch ideas. So I pitched The Enemy Within. I may have pitched others at the time, I don't remember, but certainly The Enemy Within was the one Sheila latched onto, and really it just didn't sort of stop after that. It was more or less, I'm pretty sure I did The Enemy Within, and while I was doing that, Sheila said, well, we need another one, which was Raiders of the Last Ark. And then after that, I more or less fell into the pattern of being, if not the only writer, the main writer on it.
So it then goes, excuse me, so Steve's material was very much in keeping with sort of the UK traditional sort of boys comic at the time, where the Transformers weren't really characters as such, they were in and around. It was the humans that were more centric, but your story feels very much closer to a Marvel US adventure. Is that a deliberate choice from yourself, or just your influences?
Yeah, I think the brief generally was to make the stories as self-contained and self-supportive as possible, because we didn't know very far in the future where the storyline was going in the US. We may have seen some plots and drafts of directions and what characters they were using, but generally the brief was to make them fairly self-sufficient. So Man of Iron was deliberately out of continuity, deliberately, I suppose, more British in style. The Transformers barely speak, so it couldn't really impact on anything that was going to happen in subsequent US stories. But my preference was to focus on the robots and still keep them apart from the sort of main flow of the story, but not to the point where the robots were more or less just sort of ciphers in the story. I really wanted, they came equipped with this massive, folder of bios, lovingly put together by Bob Budiansky. And I just thought, well, here are the characters. So I preferred to focus far more on the robots and just try and keep the stories that I did, all the characters, all the toys back in their box where they started from.
So the comic sort of continues, sort of goes back to reprinting the US material for a bit, and then so the first really big change happens is when the comic goes from fortnightly to weekly. So inside, sort of from the editorial and office sort of standpoint, how far ahead was that decision made, and what was sort of the concerns if you were to go weekly? What was that going to look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think, at that time there were changes because Sheila stopped being the editor and moved on to other titles that Marvel was launching. And Ian Rimmer became the editor, and I actually became assistant editor on the title. And, that was when it was decided we would revamp the look, we would do a mini relaunch, and it would be weekly, colour, all the things. I just think it has been such a success in terms of sales, surprising maybe everybody that it had sold so well, and figures were continuing to rise, that everybody just felt more confident about a weekly schedule, and B, full colour. And I think Ian came on board and really sort of took it by the scruff of the neck and said we need to make this a more cohesive thing on screen. He'd very much been schooled, he'd been on Eagle as well, and they were very much schooled in the art of making the editorial part of the reading experience. So, 2000 AD had Tharg as its alien editor. Scream had Ghastly McNasty as this, strange creature who was editing the comic. So there was that kind of more immersive feel to it, and Ian was keen to recreate that, hence the fact that we got like a Transformers character actually answering the reader letters in character, and little touches like that just to make it that more unique, immersive experience for the reader, really. So at that time as well, you had the Transformers making their TV debut on TVM in the UK, and so obviously I'm assuming that helped bolster popularity, and sort of your next tale after that sort of borrows a little bit from one of the episodes. Was that again just due to not wanting to get involved in Bob Budiansky's ongoing story? No, I think because we had mini, almost sort of like you say, sales boosts due to either product that Hasbro were releasing at the time, or sometimes they let us piggyback on their TV advertising. So, you would get a flash of the comic cover at the end of a Hasbro advert. It was good for us to be as aligned as possible with either what Hasbro were doing, or the thinking behind Decepticon Dam Busters was to, make it clear that the TV series and the comic weren't wholly different. That, there was an element of, oh yes, I've seen that on TV, and here's the comic version of it. But, we hedged our bets with that by making it a kind of flashback story within our own ongoing story. By then, we knew the Dinobots had dropped out of Bob's future plans. Bob was, more or less saddled with, he had to more or less clear the decks each time so he could bring in, anything from 10 to 20 new characters. So we knew he'd let the Dinobots go for a while, which made them ideal really for our next little bit of UK storytelling. And we just picked up from the end of US 8 with Ratchet and the Dinobots after their showdown with Megatron. So, we wanted to keep that. We wanted to pull our readers along in our continuity, but Decepticon Dam Busters was definitely done as a kind of nod to the fact that the TV show was on at the time.
So you say obviously our continuity, so that is noticeable. That's the decisions to sort of weave your ongoing tales in and around the US stories. Was there any discussion or debate about that? Because it seems like a difficult thing to work with if you've got all of a sudden 3 months down the line you don't know what's coming next.
Yeah, it was tough, and it was tough when it definitely sort of behooved us to jump onto the special teams launch that Hasbro were doing, with a themed issue, free gifts, the whole 9 yards. And again, we got that TV advertising slot with them, but getting special teams into our story at that time, we were still some way off where we would reprint the US issue where they made their debut. So it was a little bit of a juggling act at some times, and we had to come up with a contrivance to get the special teams in ahead of their actual debut in the US story that we'd be reprinting. So, there were odd problems, but, largely we kept to that idea of pick the characters who aren't being used so much. Make sure you don't kill off major characters in case, they're just in the next US story. And it was only really when we got up to the animated movie and issue 79 where we had that latitude to tell much more our own stories, because we had a whole cast of characters from the animated movie that we knew the US comic wasn't going anywhere near.
So you've mentioned obviously quite a lot of involvement from Hasbro. Because it's a licensed book, how difficult was it to work with them, or how easy was it? Because obviously their ideas, you're selling Transformers, and obviously they're looking at the comic should kind of be selling it as well, unlike say a Spider-Man comic just exists to sell the idea of a Spider-Man comic.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think, we worked well with Hasbro. I mean, Hasbro, in my memory, used to see scripts or story outlines, but I don't ever remember any sort of feedback. We dealt with the UK office rather than the US, and their focus was very much more on the toys, the marketing hit there in the UK. So as long as we weren't, we were happy to tie in with their launches as and when, whether it be the special teams or the new leaders or headmasters, they were happy more or less with whatever we came up with story-wise. And so just touching on sort of the wider sort of Marvel UK office, with Transformers being the success, and again, quite a lot of original content being produced for it, which hadn't really been Marvel UK's wheelhouse for quite some time. So Captain Britain and the strip and Doctor Who notwithstanding. At that point, it seems to be quite a push for, if there's a license going, is it worth going for, and quite a lot being snapped up. Yeah, I think Transformers, the success of Transformers, opened the door to, a real push by Marvel UK into licensed toy or comic, or other media characters. So, I think it just showed that it really could work, and there was an appetite out there from readers. So I think it opened the doors. I think the success of Transformers made Marvel more confident, or Marvel UK more confident about launching more titles, just because it had been a financial success. It was selling, in its heyday, something like 200,000 copies a week, which is staggering by today's standards. And, I just think it just sort of pushed Marvel UK in all sorts of directions. It wasn't just into other licensed titles. Within a few years, they had the confidence to launch US format titles, much more in line with what Marvel US were producing. And, I think, it just, Transformers and the success of Transformers opened many doors and shaped the next decade of Marvel UK.
So you've kind of touched on sort of before we get to sort of Transformers the movie, which I think we can arguably is sort of the game changer for both for Transformers and obviously the stories you would then tell. One of the stories before it doesn't always get the attention it does, which is in the national interest, and it's, I'd say, probably one of the most adult tales that we had out of the original run in terms of the treatment of the human characters, specifically Triple I, very cynical and dark, and still has giant robot dinosaurs in it as well, which is no mean feat.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of those particularly kind of 60s and 70s conspiracy movies. And I just think every time I looked at a Transformers story, I looked at genre and, what could we do that's a little different? You can only have so many just giant robots punching each other or trying to, turn, I don't know, ruby crystals into energon. It just felt like there needed to be more depth to it, and I'd never written down. We always wrote Transformers and anything else I've written, as if we were dealing with older kids than we were probably actually pitching at. So it didn't feel a stretch to me to do a fairly dark government conspiracy led thriller one that appealed to me. So often I write the things that I like, I enjoy, and turn those in this case into a Transformers story. But what was interesting about the US material was they often introduced characters, concepts, and then more or less just fairly quickly moved on, so leaving us in a way free rein to go deeper in on those characters, to maybe treat them in a slightly different way. So Triple I, Professor Morris, who we dropped into one of our stories, it was fun dovetailing all these different things into our, and it did start to feel by this point like our continuity. The Dinobots were available again, so we used the Dinobots. But we were always, I think, at this stage pushing towards advancing our own storyline, and then just occasionally paying a kind of lip service to what was going on in the American book as well.
So we then get into, we say, probably the landmark story for Marvel UK's Transformers and Target 2006. So before we get into sort of the mechanics of the story, it's I think, remember, 11 weeks that you get to tell this story for a kid's tie-in book. Was there any kind of even internal pushback or concerns about we're telling this long-form story? Will we keep the little buggers along with us?
Yeah, I suppose so. We often knew how many weeks we had to fill. Now, whether that was with a series of 2-part stories or in this case, an 11-part story, I don't think we thought too long and hard about whether the kids would stay on board for it. It was a big push anyway, and it was almost a kind of mini relaunch TV ad, new cast moment for the comic. So, we brought in the new leaders, there was the obligatory free gifts, there was, that kind of cyclically comics do to try to boost their audience and, just in case it's tailing off. So, it felt like the moment to do a big epic, our first big epic. And I think, again, we were confident, or more confident about that, because we had the movie cast, because we were going in a time travel direction. It freed us up to up our scope, to up our game. And Target 2006, I don't know whether we planned it originally to be quite so long, but maybe in the mapping out of it, it just became clear it wasn't going to be a told in one. And, you know, we still tried to make it reasonably episodic. You know, so you've got little ones like the Wreckers standalone story and, you know, others along the way. So it doesn't feel like too much of a slog, hopefully. But yeah, we trusted our readers, I think, by this point, just to, you know, that they were on board and involved, and, you know, it wouldn't faze them that this story was going to play out over 3 months of comic buying time.
So you've mentioned, obviously, being conscious of not touching characters that obviously Bob would have in the US run. How quickly did you know that he wasn't paying attention to the movie or going to drop any of those characters into his ongoing run?
Yeah, I mean, we literally asked the question. You know, as soon as we saw the movie, or we read the movie script, and we knew we were doing our new leaders storyline, you know, we specifically asked the Transformers office in the US if they had plans for the movie, and other than the movie adaptation, they didn't. So it really did liberate us to just say, well, great, that's our cast then. And we desperately hope they wouldn't change their mind down the line a little bit. But it seemed too good an opportunity to miss. And, you know, not just the script itself was great, and, you know, but the movie itself was wholly inspirational to us. We really thought it was, you know, we hadn't seen that, you know, I certainly hadn't seen that Japanese style of animation before. And, you know, it blew us away. So, you know, and it was all the things I wanted, you know, sort of massive spaceborne threats, you know, that can consume whole worlds. This really sort of floated my boat in terms of storytelling. So the idea that we could, you know, initially Target 2006, as I'm sure you know, was conceived as, there's one tiny moment in the movie, the animated movie, that the whole launch pad of Target 2006, and everything more or less resets at the end, and the movie continues. Well, I don't think we knew at this point we would be able to do sequels to the movie, but the characters just came alive in Target 2006, and, you know, pretty quickly we realised, yeah, great, we've got a whole strand here we can continue on, you know, more or less ad infinitum.
One thing to touch on, with it being a weekly title and obviously full colour, we've got 11 weeks to play with, so we deal with a rotating pool of artists. Was there any particular thought given into who was doing what? The reason I mention it is because anyone who read issue 86 at the time, that fight scene drawn by Jeff Sr. was just mind-blowing, and that 7-day wait to the next issue was absolute agony.
Yeah, I think we had, you know, and this is no disrespect to any of the other artists who were working on the comic at the time, but Jeff was the explosive action guy. You know, if you were going to have a massive chase and end in a huge conflagration, it was going to be Jeff was going to be your best bet for it. But often we did it more or less by availability of artists, but occasionally we earmarked certain scripts. So, you know, we might have, I'm pretty sure Jeff did 2 or 3 parts of Target 2006. He was just, so we cycled between them. But I think, yeah, we had in mind that issue 86 would be particularly dynamic if drawn by Jeff.
So we kind of, at that point, you're also involved in, on the editorial side, the other licensed books. You've got, I think, Thundercats. Were you editing that book at the time? Or just
there was one. Yeah, there was one little bit with Thundercats where I stopped being assistant editor on Transformers and became editor on Thundercats. So, it was great for me because obviously it was my first full editorship. I was launching a comic, and it was very exciting. So, I was continuing writing Transformers, but I stepped away at that point from the editorial side. So Ian was editing, and I don't know whether he had another assistant editor or whether he was just doing it himself. But I was quite happy given Thundercats to work on. It was great fun to be at the helm for the first time. So, it was only that shortly after that, Ian decided to leave Marvel UK and go freelance, which left a vacancy for the editor of Transformers, and pretty much it felt like they felt I was the only one who could drop into it without a massive amount of catch up. So 3 issues or something of Thundercats in or out, I was pulled back over to Transformers. Didn't mind, but in a way I was, I would have been happier carrying on as editor of Thundercats and writing for Transformers. But in the end, we had to go through this slightly awkward loop of Marvel US frowned on editors writing their own titles. So, but I was in that position. So Richard Starkings became my de facto script editor on that, and everything story-wise was run through him, and he, had the sort of say-so on my scripts. So it worked okay, but we were, in a little bit of a grey area as far as, Marvel US were concerned, who did kind of had been over. Jim Shooter had come over by that point and visited us and talked to us, and Tom DeFalco followed. So, we were on their radar a bit more. And, I'd met Bob Budiansky by this time. So I think, we had to be careful, but it worked fine. Nobody seemed to notice or worry. And like I say, Richard became my script editor on that.
So you've mentioned, when we were talking earlier about the artists, sort of the juggling act of sort of who was available, but in terms of that, you start to lose artists around this time. A couple stop, like Barry Kitson's probably the earliest that I remember sort of jumping ship to 2000 AD. How easy was it to get new artists into the title?
It was a continual thing, really. We were always looking for new artists, and there was no shortage, really. But it was finding ones who could draw Transformers. It wasn't everybody's first choice to be drawing robots. A lot of people, up to and including, say, Andrew Wildman, really wanted to be drawing superheroes, but what was available was Transformers. But, we just sort of, we had a fairly open door for submissions and new talent. And, it was natural that we would start to lose, people like Barry, who was really wanting to draw Judge Dredd and human beings rather than robots, and Will Simpson likewise, that gradually they would move over to IPC Fleetway, and we would have to fill those gaps. So we were always bringing in new talent, and I think that's most evident once we get to the likes of Dan Reed, Robin Smith, and some of those latter artists who, and Robin Smith is interesting because we kind of poached him from IPC Fleetway and got him doing Transformers. So yeah, it was a continual search. I mean, we needed a lot of covers, so cover artists were a premium as well, and from those cover artists often came our interior artists.
So that was always your view, that's sort of your audition piece, if you can.
Yeah. That's certainly how, say, Lee Sullivan started. Lee was started on covers, and that was the way. Start on covers, show you can do it, and then, let's see how you do with a strip, So, it was often covers were not exactly the tryout, but certainly the let's show how committed and good you are at drawing robots or whatever we ask. And I think that was just the way it worked. We we picked up new artists like Lee and Dan and Robin, and it just sort of, I don't think we were ever pushed for artists, really.
So after Target 2006 finishes, we go back to the US material for a little bit. Then the start of the sequels, you bring back Galvatron straight away, or at your earliest possible opportunity. Did you have any idea, because this is sort of the start of a longer set of subplots, did you have any inkling that how far this was going to go, or was it just, I've got this toy back to play with, let's see what I can do with him?
Yeah, I think it was, we waited to see, for a start it was, how did the movie do, it came and went without much of a ripple, which we thought was a shame. But, we still thought, well, we've got this goldmine of characters. Yes, there was the animated series, but that didn't seem to matter that they were doing post-movie stories. So we just said, well, look, we've got these characters, let's bring them back into the mix, let's do the sequel. And, that really was another kind of turning point in the comic, because, again, we introduced supporting characters like Death's Head, and, it just seemed we kept getting bolder and more independent of the US, and we were treating Transformers like any action adventure comic. It had to have new interest in it all the time. So we pushed the boat from then on, really, about what the stories can be. Wanted Galvatron Dead or Alive is effectively a spaghetti western, or in sort of several places it pays homage to that genre, and hence the Bounty Hunter. And then, we did a zombie Transformers story, and then, from, just sort of generally, we sort of pushed the boundaries a bit and the scale of what it could be, always.
So, we'd have to sort of touch on Death's Head here, given as he sprung out of Transformers onto wider fame and fortune. How quickly in the process of creating him did you realise, hold on a minute, if he just drops in Transformers, we might not get to play with him too much?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Richard Starkings who said, this is fine, bring in a new character, but, we've got to be careful that if we're going to design a character, that it belongs to Marvel rather than Hasbro. I mean, it hadn't even occurred to me. I didn't even think more than that Death's Head was going to be a one-shot for that story, really. The idea of bringing him back hadn't sort of formulated either. But once we saw Jeff's original sort of design for the character, I think everybody just went, oh, this is pretty cool. We should make sure he's a Marvel character rather than a Hasbro character. So wheels were put in motion, and though, in terms of strict publication, Death's Head appeared in Transformers before his little one-page High Noon Tex story that featured as a sort of advert almost, in various Marvel UK comics. We just had to make sure that we created him as a Marvel character who happened to be in Transformers as well. So, High Noon Tex appears probably a month or two after Wanted Galvatron Dead or Alive. But like I say, the process began around the same time. I think, I definitely credit Richard Starkings for seeing the potential, really, or the fact that we should cover ourselves in that way.
So, with Death's Head sort of being we'll just carry on with him for a little bit, is how quickly did you know he was going to get his sort of solo book, or who was pushing? Were you pushing for that, or was that just Richard Starking saying, let's get this out here?
Well, I think there were a few things. First of all, there was the decision to take him out of Transformers. We decided that, it was sort of foolhardy just to keep him in Transformers. And about that time was when we were launching Dragon's Claws, which was the first US format series. And I think we were keen to say, well, look, we're creating one set of characters. We've already got Death's Head. Let's just shunt him out of Transformers via Doctor Who, strangely, as it happened, and into issue 5 of Dragon's Claws. And then comprehensively, he's part of the Marvel UK Marvel universe. So, I think it was predicated by the idea that we were doing our own originated titles, and that, yes, there was potential for Death's Head to be one of those.
So Death's Head gets his swan song, and sort of where one of your big indelible marks in the Transformers franchise is where you actually give the origin of them. Where did the inspiration for that come from?
I think with the origin, I was never very happy with the idea that it was the Quintessence and they'd been a slave race and who'd rebelled. It didn't seem to fit quite what I wanted, the grandiose scale of things that I wanted for the UK comic. So, it had never been definitively put into the US comic. So we felt kind of, well, why don't we do it? Why don't we say, pair Unicron up with, the yin to his yang, which is Primus, and make it more, I was almost kind of reared on the comics of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and these massive gods and monsters storylines in Thor and Fantastic Four, Galactus and, Ego the Living Planet. And I just thought we can just go crazy with this, really. Let's do our origin, something that goes back to the dawn of time. And in the process, I think that the sort of thought behind it was to make the Transformers themselves more significant. Rather than being the creation of another race, they were created for a greater purpose, which was to guard against the coming of Unicron. So it sort of ticked a lot of boxes, both in terms of the scale of the stories we wanted to tell and the fact that we wanted the readers to understand the Transformers' place in this universe we were creating, really. We always went a bit more cosmic than the US comic. So I think, we wanted this idea that the Transformers had weight and significance in a universal context.
So we carry on sort of with the ongoing sort of Galvatron plot, if you will, up to sort of, and the comic hits 200 issues in the middle of this. How surprised were you that it lasted that long, given licensed comics generally as a rule are not always long for this earth, no matter the quality that they have in them?
I think everyone was surprised by Transformers, both initially and then that it continued to do so well. I mean, like you say, toy tie-in titles tend to work with that particular age bracket of children who were into the toys at the time, and when they grow up, they're gone. But I think a lot of kids stayed with it for a start, and I think because the brand was continually still out there, it also had a longer shelf life. It wasn't just a one-year wonder. And I think everyone was surprised, but pleasantly surprised. And we hope that some of that was down to the fact that we put a lot of thought and effort into the stories, into the comic itself, into the backup strips, and we wanted it to be a must buy, you must get next issue. And we used a lot of the kind of the tropes of next issue boxes and, the sort of the page, transformation page, which gave readers lots of background on the characters. With issue 200, we did a Meet the Artists feature in the little free booklet. There was definitely a sense of, that idea of carrying your readers along in editorial ways as well as story.
So, shortly after the 200th issue, title has its first sort of big format change for a while, and it still retains its weekly frequency, but the format changes in terms of the content being 5 pages of ongoing US story and then 5 pages of UK material, which initially in colour then drops to black and white. Now, I take it that's a cost issue at the time?
Yeah, Transformers, without a doubt, took a dip in sales at, around the time we were doing Time Wars. It just couldn't sustain itself at the levels it had been. And that meant that they couldn't afford to keep originating 11 pages of colour every batch of weeks. So yeah, it just, we wanted it to continue. The answer was to take it out of colour, do 5-page stories. And, it was disappointing because it kind of meant you couldn't do the big stories anymore. They often had to be either self-contained or real mini continuing stories. And often they were played for, not exactly laughs, but they were quick in and out stories, one-offs, a bit like, say, Out to Lunch or something. But, we did do a few continuing threads, like the whole Carnivac storyline, the Survivors, Earth Force. So we kept that feel going, I suppose, of an ongoing story that demands some kind of reader loyalty, with the knowledge that we were now into the realm of not just other toys, but computer games and other pulls on our next generation of readers' time. And, even the loyalty of the older readers wouldn't be enough to sustain it. So, yeah, we had to cost cut. And that hence, the paper stock changed, the amount of colour changed, and so on.
So around this time you're also getting ready to take over the realms of the US title from Bob Budiansky, who'd had enough, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Bob, Bob and I were good friends by this point. We'd met a couple of times. And he'd come to the UK, I'd been to New York. And, Bob came over at one point just for a kind of a visit. I forget whether there was some grander purpose or whether he was just going to be in the UK, and if so, we would take him out to lunch. But over lunch, he just said to me he'd more or less, exhausted himself on Transformers stories and they were looking for a replacement, and would I take it over? And it was all very informal. It wasn't Bob's book to really hand over. Don Daly was the editor, but Don was desperate for somebody to come in who knew it, and Bob obviously knew I did, so it was very informal, the kind of handover. And at that time, I was coming to my end of my staff time at Marvel UK. I had enough freelance work that I was confident to go full-time freelance with, the stuff Marvel UK were doing, Dragon's Claws, Death's Head, and things like Transformers. So it seemed a propitious time for me to leave staff and become freelance. And that led to, in 1989, I left staff and moved for a short time to New York. So I was right on top of the Marvel offices and writing Transformers for them. So it was brilliant. It was a massive door opener for me because, that was my first work for Marvel US, which had always been a bit of a dream, I suppose, for me.
So you take over the US, but what's the oversight and sort of editorial relationship changes working with them as opposed to obviously in-house where you're on staff, or obviously working with Richard Starkins, for example?
I mean, it's a little different, but Don Daly was very much just, Simon, it's over to you. So I would come up with storylines, they would go off to Hasbro, and by this point Hasbro were, I suppose, less involved, less focused on Transformers. So, we didn't get much, if any, in the way of feedback or, really the Micromasters were the last characters, Micromasters, Action Masters, that Hasbro brought out in G1. So they were largely already in the comic or could be introduced quite easily. And we didn't get many edicts or whatever. I mean, when Bob Budiansky handed the comic to me, he basically said, look, this may only be for 4 or 6 issues. Sales have dipped. We may, you may be taking it on, and 4 issues later it's gone. So I thought, well, okay, I don't care. It's still my first work for Marvel US. Happy to take it. But also it gave us a kind of freedom to just go, well, we might as well try anything and everything here to keep the readers we've got, maybe bring a few back. So we launched into, bringing back Megatron, lacing in the Primus Unicron storyline, kicking off the Matrix quest, bringing in Thunder. We just went big time on, the storylines. We went straight. We reset to Marvel UK sensibilities and said, let's just go kind of supersized and cosmic here. And, we ended up getting 20 more issues out, 25 issues, I think.
And so, as you've sort of left editorial with Marvel UK, and sort of the black and white era sort of comes to, I remember back in the days of reader feeling it was quite a surprise. Oh, it's actually the black and white stopped. What was that like from your end? Did you get lots of advance notice it was coming to an end, or?
Yeah, I kind of knew. I mean, sales continued to dip on the UK comic. They weren't catastrophic by any stretch, but in terms of origination, which is the most expensive bit of it, the writing was on the wall a while before the axe fell. I don't remember exactly how much notice I had, but I suppose because I was working on the US book, the impact of that decision was somewhat less. It was just like, well, okay, I get that. We got quite a few of the black and white stories, probably a good 60 or something issues of the black and whites, maybe a shade more. So, we did okay with it. It's just, we knew that it will rarely pick up to the point where it would sustain itself for another 100 issues.
So you're on the US book, and a couple of issues in, Jeff Senior joins you. Were you pitching to get him involved, or was Don aware of his work?
I mean, it was very much in my mind to bring Jeff and Andrew with me. I mean, obviously Jose Delbo was the artist, and I really enjoyed working with Jose, but deadlines being deadlines, there were points where Jose was either just going to be running behind, or we would have needed a fill-in otherwise. So, I suggested to Don we use Andrew, Jeff first, then Andrew. And, Don suggested Dwayne Turner, who we also gave a try to, but pretty quickly it became apparent to all of us that, the right fit really were Jeff and Andrew for keeping the book going. And, Jose was doing other things like Brute Force at the time. So generally it seemed like the right time for a change, and Andrew pretty much, from issue 69 took the book to the end.
So the US material is obviously back to being reprinted in the UK, and it does very much feel like the issue 75 of the US run, so up to 322 in the UK for those keeping score, felt very much like the natural end point. Was it originally sort of planned to end there and just lurched on a little bit longer, or?
No, we very much, in terms of the US comic, just started up the next storyline. We only got word that it would be the final issue 80 about the time we were writing issue 78. So we had very few issues to suddenly change tack and bring it to some kind of conclusion. Yes, the conclusion of the Unicorn War is a big sort of ending of sorts, but there was going to be a lot more about the last Autobot and the search for excuse me, some sort of these ancient Transformers. We had plans, but they were just never to be, really.
So at this time, we were in the UK. There were letter writers to the pages who were savvy to get the US comic and were pointing out that US material was going to end. So is the UK comic going to end? And the editorial was always kind of wait and see. And then they did announce there would be a continuation with 5 pages of original material penned by yourself. Then a fortnight later there was a retraction saying, no, it's not happening. Was there any discussions with you about that, or?
No, I don't remember anything actually being put in front of me or my being asked to come up with story ideas.
So, in your mind, from issue 7, from the US issues, you had that couple of issues, or in the UK it's about another 5 or 6. You've got issues left.
I think, when issue 80 finished and I wrote that kind of it never ends outro to it, I really did think there would be no more Transformers storytelling from me.
And then shortly later the UK asked you to do an epilogue of sorts for the last annual.
Yes, yeah. There were dribs and drabs that came along, that Another Time and Place story. Yeah, the annuals, in the way of annuals, kind of outlasted the comic in some ways in terms of needing some original material, even if it was text story led. But, no, there was very little beyond that. And, when the UK comic finally closed down, I was quite confident that that would be it for Transformers, full stop, in terms of comics.
There was the brief Generation 2 revival at Fleetway that you had a hand in for a couple of issues, but didn't seem to take.
No, I think G2, we did the G2 series for the US, and that did okay for 12 issues, but, it wasn't the same, it wasn't supported by TV in the same way, so, it only had a limited shelf life, which was a shame, because, I think we did some good stuff on G2, but, once again, I thought, well, surely that's it this time. But of course, it really does never end.
So, when did you first get a feeling that Transformers wasn't ever really going to go away? And also the sort of appreciation of the UK comic and, more importantly, your work in it?
Well, I think after G2, I wasn't aware even that there were fan conventions starting up, or that Beast Wars had got going and it had ties to Transformers G1. So this was all a bit of a revelation when in 97 we were contacted by 3H, who were organising the US Transformers convention, and asked, to do a comic on something called Beast Wars, which Andrew and I had never heard of. So we had a bit of a crash course, excuse me, and then, we got cracking on it. So, just generally, it surprised the hell out of us that A, there was a fan community, and B, that there was a Transformers series we'd never heard about. But and really, I suppose from that point on, it really didn't go away again.
So, it's looking at sort of your association with us, certain characters that you will always be sort of associated with. I think Grimlock and Galvatron are probably the two ones that most fans would easily shout to. What was it that made those fun to write?
I think because, Galvatron had only ever been in the movie, so he felt like our character. He felt like something we'd built as much as the movie had. And Grimlock, I just felt we we turned into something he wasn't necessarily in either the cartoon series or the American side of the comic storytelling. So, I always felt, and I like characters, especially like Grimlock, that sort of tread that line between good and bad. They're neither wholly one thing or the other. They're a little more conflicted or, shaded, I suppose.
So, also you mentioned the comics, you now sort of understand it doesn't ever go away, so the first set of reprints are in 2001, 2002. You're working at Titan at the time, if I remember correctly.
Yep, and it was interesting because that was based on the fact that I'd now been to several fan conventions, and that it did seem to have legs, the whole sort of thing as a brand and a nostalgia thing as well. I took the idea to Titan, who I was, as you say, working for at the time, of collecting up all this UK and US material. It no longer belonged to Marvel, it had reverted to Hasbro. So, it was there to be had. And as it happened, we kind of got in just before Dreamwave got the license and started, making a splash with Transformers again. So, we managed to sort of get the rights to that material, just under the wire, really, before I think it would have been much more difficult for Titan to secure that license.
And you mentioned Dreamwave, so they very quickly get you on board to flesh out the backstory of their new take.
Yeah, it's very nice. This was one where I contacted them once I knew they had the license and just said, more or less, look, I'm out here, would love to do something for you guys, and they were very receptive to that. And out of that came The War Within and Armada Energon. So it's just great that this new sort of wave of writers and artists and editors, sort of, I suppose, respecting my stuff enough that they wanted me involved in their reboot of it and trusted me not to just, I suppose, kind of rehash former glories. So yeah, it was great. And Dreamwave led to IDW, and really there's rarely been any time since the early 2000s that I haven't been writing Transformers for one media or another.
So your most recent work, because it ties nicely in, is sort of going back to very much the roots of the Marvel UK comic with the 84 issue 0 and the Secrets and Lies miniseries.
Yeah.
So
yeah, this was another nice opportunity that dropped in my lap. I was contacted by David Marriott at IDW to say that they wanted to do something special for the 35th anniversary, and they thought some kind of G1 Marvel prequel comic was something the fans would go on board with. And I thought about that, and I said, I don't really think there's enough for a prequel. The first issue takes us from peace to war in a few pages, so I'm not sure what the prequel to that is. So we chewed it around for a while, and I started to suggest this idea of looping the story into what was already there rather than making it a prequel as such, and revealing aspects about those original founding, grounding stories that we maybe didn't see at the time. And like I say, the pace of that first issue, the first 5 pages of Marvel's issue 1, are so fast and furious that I thought, well, there have to be steps and stages and characters we didn't see in that, and maybe motivations and reasons. And that was where it all came out of. And then I suggested the idea of looping in Man of Iron into that idea, as that had been the only UK story that the US comic had reprinted, but it had never felt particularly like a canon story, like it sort of fitted with the continuity. So the aim would be to make it much more a part of the continuity and somehow make it fit with actual characters into the existing storyline without rubbishing or throwing out anything that the original creative team of Steve and John Ridgway and Mike Collins had done.
So, obviously, it's. Do you think that there's scope for further sequels to that? Have they asked, or do you have any still in the back pocket?
Yeah, I think there's room for more. I think it would be very Cybertron centric now, whereas before, with the Secrets and Lies series, we tried to involve Earth as much as possible. But I think, with the Headmasters series and some of the other established stuff from that era, I've definitely got other stories I could tell in that 84 universe. Whether I get to tell them is very much down to, I suppose, IDW and the call for it from the fans.
So, you heard that. If you do want it, get out and buy the trade. It is available now from all good comic shops.
Perfect.
But thanks for taking the time to share your thoughts regarding the Marvel UK comic, because
it's been a pleasure.
I mean, for me, it's a fond memory, just looking back and all that. But sorry, we will edit this out because it sounds horrendous. Thanks for taking the time to share your thoughts about the UK comic and sort of its impact on your career. Is there anything else you'd like to say, or that you've not said in the thousands of interviews that people have asked you about this comic up until now?
Well, just a big thank you to the fans as always, because we wouldn't be anywhere without the fact that they'd stayed loyal to it. Excuse me. When any other sort of set of fans may well have forgotten all about Transformers, they stayed with it and created that next wave really that has sustained it to this day. So I'm very grateful because it has kept me gainfully employed, and just generally it's Transformers has become so much more than it started out as, and I'm very happy to have been a part in it and added some bits along the way.
I really enjoyed Secrets and Lies. Just Guido and JP doing that full retro art was just mind blowing.
Yeah, no, I mean they did a bang up job, and the attention to detail from both of them was just superb. So it's very much down to them as much as anything.
No, it was really enjoyable. We were all kind of guessing the last issue, because we remembered discussions about your Nemesis plot potentially for Beast Wars, and we're thinking, is it going to be that? And it wasn't quite. There's a few of us going, we all know what's happening in the next issue. And I was like, no, we don't.
There were actually talks. I actually put a few Beast Wars things in the original draft, but because IDW were doing a new Beast Wars series, they didn't want to go that way with 84, and that's fair enough. So we never got to do a little nod to Beast Wars in, Secrets and Lies.
I think it stood well enough on its own, to be fair. It'd be good.
Yeah. It's certainly, I think we've left enough scope there for more, series to follow without that.
Oh, well, fingers crossed. It'll definitely be interesting. And I'm enjoying seeing To the Death and Shift. It's nice to actually see it on a UK. The little Killer-Toe insert was really nice.
No, it's nice to see it at that size, and it's fun, and great to see it out in a different format.
And again, on a UK shelf. Pandemic obviously being a bit of a pain in the backside, but it was nice to go into the Wade Smith and go, yes.
Well, hopefully that should, now things are opening up a bit more. Fingers crossed that will mean it will be a little bit more regular than it has been.
Any plans on a sequel or continuation for that?
Not at the moment. We're doing a bit more Killer-Toa stuff, Jeff and I, which we'll work out how and where it may appear first in Shift, this new series, So yeah, we're doing bits and pieces, but both of us are kind of busy on other things, so difficult to commit to something as big as To the Death. But we might do something more.
Well, Fresh Kill at all won't be turned down in this house anyway.
Great stuff.
Once again, thanks very much for taking the time out of your day to speak to us, Simon. Do appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Well, there you go. Everything you perhaps didn't know about, Transformers UK. It's a fascinating comic. It was my first comic back in the day, and I still don't forgive my parents for throwing away my issues of the original Transformers UK Transformers comic. But thank you very much for doing that, Andy. I really enjoyed that, and I hope that the listeners did too. If people would like to hear more from yourself and from Simon, where can they do it?
Well, first of all, Simon's recently completed a creator-owned series called To the Death alongside long-time creative partner Jeff Senior, and that's currently been serialised in the UK monthly comic Shift. So if you go to getmycomics.com, if you want to order online, or it is actually in WH Smith's as well. Issue 4, I think, is out. We should be out around the time this is broadcast, possibly. They're also... In that, there's a newspaper-style insert with one of the characters, Killatone, a sort of black and white tabloidy thing. Well worth checking out. And obviously we mentioned Secrets and Lies, which kind of revisited the Marvel US and the first Marvel UK story. That's out in trade paperback now. If you buy more, IDW might let them do more. Because, well, if it sells well enough, they're not going to leave money on the table. As for my things, probably... I dabble at the moment. Sort of TF Nation, as you can imagine, running a convention takes up a lot of my time. So we're gearing up for our August big broadcast of 2021, an online virtual event to replace our in-person event, which sadly can't happen this year, as Lawless obviously is experiencing as well. So we'll be back in 2022 in person. But if you go to tfnation.com, all the news for the big broadcast will be there.
What is TF Nation? I mean. Do your sales pitch there. So you've listened to Simon, you've had that little spark, that little hit of nostalgia, and you're interested again. What is TF Nation, and where can they find more about that?
So tfnation.com. So it's Europe's largest Transformers convention. We try to make sure that there's something for everyone, because there's obviously, as you can tell, growing up with Marvel UK, I'm a bit of an old fart. But Transformers keeps going. There's new series, there's new toys, new comics. There's always something new with Transformers, and we try and make sure we bring some of that to every event. There's also, if you do have that nostalgia of, I want to pick up some old stuff, we have toy dealers who will sell a vast array of vintage material, as well as obviously all the new stuff as well. We get guests from the world of comics, from the world of toy design, from the world of animation, and basically anyone who's had anything to do with Transformers, we do try and get them along at some point, because it's just such a many-splendored thing.
Yeah, so do go and check that out. It's a digital event this year, much like Lawless is, but it'll be in person. Whereabouts is it? I mean, it's UK based, yes?
Yes, so the in-person is at the Birmingham Hilton Metropole, and it's typically in August every year. We haven't yet announced dates for 2022, but it's always in August.
Excellent. Well, keep an eye out on the website. Once again, it's tfnation.com?
Yep.
Excellent. And where can they find you? Where are you on the socials?
Oh, generally I can be found lurking on Twitter. Just I use my Sunday name for that for some strange reason. So at Andrew D Turbo, you'll generally see me noodling, sketching away, or talking nonsense.
Excellent. Well, go give Andy a follow there. Check out the stuff from Simon. This podcast, as I said, has been produced as part of the Lawless Comic Con, which is at lawlesscomiccon.co.uk, where this year is a digital event where there's podcasts and videos and tons of different output from your favourite creators, artists, writers, editors, random podcasters like myself. If you've enjoyed this podcast, you can find more over at rogue2media.com, where myself and Mr. Elton, we host many podcasts, this, The Expanse, The Great Derelict. Just go check it all out. I'm on Twitter at AndyFreeE. The podcast is on at Great Derelict. And thank you once again for doing this for me, Andy. It was a delight to listen to, from the outside, and hopefully we'll have you back again at some point. We can talk more Transformers stuff.
Well, thanks very much for inviting me, and I hope everyone found it at least a fraction as informative and interesting as I did. And yeah, I'd love to come back on at some point and probably go into a bit more scary fan obsessed detail about Transformers.
I was gonna say you showed remarkable restraint. I'm sure. I'm sure we could have devolved into now in panel 6 of issue 43.
You're probably not wrong, to be fair.
Nothing wrong with that at all, mate. Nothing wrong with that. But once again, thank you very much. And it does just leave me to say, I should go.